Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Drakon from Fantasy Flight Games. Now Drakon has been around for quite a while and it's gone through different editions at Fantasy Flight, and in fact the game is now out of print. I reviewed the last edition that they ever printed of that game, although if you do like what you see in this video, I think they're pretty common. I don't think you're going to have trouble finding one. You might have to pay a little bit more than you would want, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. Now, Drakon is a dungeon crawling game, but it's a much lighter one than you might suspect. This is not Descent by any stretch of the imagination. Instead, it's more of a sort of take that racing game. Essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to go, it's a tile laying game, and you're trying to go through this dungeon by laying out tiles and moving your adventurer, and they're all the standard adventuring tropes, barbarian and Amazon and elf and all these different things, wizard. You're going through this dungeon trying to get as many coins as possible, and you're either going to try to get to a certain amount of points, which you can, it varies depending on what style or difficulty or length of game you want, 8 coins, 10 coins. You can even do it where you have to get a certain amount of coins and then get to an exit tile as well, because every tile is going to have a special ability, and sometimes you're going to be placing tiles just to screw over the other players. And of course, the game is called Drakon for a reason. There's this giant dragon called Drakon who is the lord of this dungeon, and if you place out certain tiles, you will summon Drakon, and that's where you can really screw with the other players. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at how the game is played, and then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of Drakon. This is a competitive game for 2 to 6 players where you play adventurers who have gone down into a dungeon that is inhabited by an evil dragon known as Drakon, who is trying to kill you before you escape with his gold. The goal is to get 10 gold. The first player to get 10 gold immediately wins the game. There are variants you can do where you need to just get to either a lower threshold and then escape from the dungeon, but the base game is just getting to 10 gold. So at the beginning, you're going to have this start tile here that just has a little dragon head with on both sides with arrows going in 3 directions. So you'll choose that as the starting tile. Then however many players you have in the game, they're each going to get a miniature, and all the miniatures are different, corresponding to different characters, like a knight and like an Amazon and a barbarian, and all of these different things, a rogue and a wizard. But if you play with the base game, none of them are any different. They're just little placeholders to signify which character you are. But we'll talk about the advanced rules later that might give you some actual personality. Now each player is going to get 4 of these tiles, and this is what you build the dungeon with, are these Drakon tiles here. So once you have your starting hand, once everyone's out on the board, you'll decide who's going to go first, and then you're going to take your turns. Now on your turn, you have 2 different options of what you can actually do. The first thing you can do is simply place a tile. So you'll have your hand of tiles. You could take one of them, you look at them in secret, take one of them and place it out on the board. Now the rules for placement are that you can't have the arrows on the tiles going in the same direction. So if I wanted to place this tile out, I couldn't place it like this. I know it's kind of hard to see, but there's 2 arrows going against each other. That is illegal. Any other way, as long as there's a chamber there and as long as the arrows are going in opposite directions, you can connect it. Once you place that chamber, you're going to draw another tile to replace it off the stack, and then it goes to the next player. Alternatively, you can choose to, well, let's just build the map out a little bit more. So let's just say it's been built for a while, and here we go. So this might be what the game looks like after a few turns of people placing tiles. And the reason why you're placing all these tiles out is because you're trying to find gold, obviously, and all of these rooms have different special abilities, which I'll cover in a second. So you place all of these tiles out here, and eventually what you're going to want to do is move. So that's the other thing that you can do on your turn instead. You can just move your hero into an adjacent chamber, and then you have to do whatever that chamber tells you to do. So I might go this way. You can go in the same path if you want. You can have as many heroes on the same tile as you want. It doesn't really matter. But wherever you end up, you have to take that action. And some rooms are blank, like this one here, but most of them have some sort of special action. So I'll just list off a few of them now. I know you're wondering about the dragon. Well, let's cover that first. So one of them is called Drakon Moves, and they look something like this, or exactly like this. I'll have a little picture of Drakon with arrows in the center. When someone moves on the Drakon moves tile, one of two things is going to happen. If Drakon, here, I'll show you him in all of his glory. It's actually pretty cool looking. If Drakon is still off of the map at the beginning of the game and someone has played the Drakon moves tile and someone moves onto it for the very first time, that player gets to just put Drakon out in a space that's not occupied by a hero. So he swoops into the dungeon and he's just there. From then on, if someone moves onto a Drakon move space, they get to move Drakon up to 3 spaces. If Drakon ends on a space with 1 or more heroes, all the heroes on that space are going to get shunted back to the start space, and then they lose a gold from their pile. I should say random gold, because the gold is actually randomized. I'm sorry. There we go. There's either 1s or 2s, and for some reason I'm blanking at the moment and can't remember if there may be 3s. But yes, there are 3s. So there you go. So you lose a random gold, and that could be very, very devastating to you, obviously. If you are ever moved onto Drakon space, you also suffer that effect. But if he just goes through your squares or you just move through his, you're fine. So people can move onto the Drakon space just to move him in order to place him on your tile and kind of screw you over. Let's look at a few of the other different ones here. By the way, every player gets a little cheat sheet that has all these different tiles described in detail as well. So another one here would be the destroy tile, which is actually going to let you destroy another chamber that as long as there's no heroes or Drakon standing on it. Then you have the key chamber, which is going to let you move against arrows where you normally wouldn't be able to as long as you start there. The coin is simply you get to find a coin. You're going to take a random coin from the Dragon's Hoard. This one is actually going to force someone to lose one of their coins. So if you move on to this, you have to lose a coin randomly from your hoard. So you would put this in front of someone if they're going in a certain direction. You want to make them stumble. This one lets you teleport into a different section of the dungeon. And this is the escape, which can save you from some of the other negative effect chambers, but also if you play with the variant where you have to escape, this is one of the tiles that you have to go onto. So those are just a few of them. There's a lot of other ones as well, but really that's the game. You're going to be either placing tiles out, or once there's enough tiles for your personal goal, you're going to be moving on to them. You might try to make chains so that you can move around in a circle and get a bunch of different beneficial effects, but other players may try to trip you up by doing that, namely by trying to move Drakon onto you as well, and that's the primary impetus of the game and how you're going to get things done. The last thing I'll talk about is, like I said, one of the variances that you can have, your characters actually do important things. Like they'll have their own special ability they get to use once per game. This is little tokens that signify whether you've used it or not. So for instance, the Amazon has the ability to move 1 additional chamber as long as it's a legal move. The Barbarian can be on the same chamber, and when the Barbarian is on the same chamber, they can use their ability to move the hero, to push them out of the way. The Dwarf can immediately discard chambers and then draw that many new ones in order to get a better pick from the tile selection, and so on and so forth. But that's the game. Try to get as much gold as you can to either meet a certain threshold or escape with it and avoid the wrath of Drakon and your evil rival adventurers. Let's get to my final thoughts. Well, I am all about the theme of Drakon. I mean, I love dungeon crawling games. There's a million of them at this point. But even so, it's still a theme that I really enjoy, and I think that presentation-wise, Drakon does a really, really good job. I really like the miniatures in the game. The tiles look okay. They're not like gorgeous tiles, but they're simple, straightforward, graphically presented, and they're good quality stock as well. Drakon even looks cool too, although I've heard that one of the notorious things I've heard about this game is that a lot of people's Drakon stinks. Like whatever plastic process they use for the miniature for Drakon, he just starts to smell after a while. I had heard similar things about the leather cup from Stone Age, so Drakon is not alone in this, but I didn't have that problem. It could possibly be just because my olfactory senses are burned out from 16 years of working in printing companies, but anyways, it wasn't really an issue for me. Presentation-wise, I think it all works pretty well, and it all fits in a very small box, so it doesn't leave a big footprint on your shelf. Now, as far as the gameplay goes, not so good. While I may like the theme and presentation of it, I think the biggest fault that Drakon has is that it's boring. It's just a boring game. It's not bad. It's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. And there is some fun to be had at certain junctures of the game. But all that cool theme that comes out from the presentation of it and the tiles and the, of what's supposed to be happening in the game doesn't really equate to how the game is mechanically played from turn to turn. What this game really is just sort of a puzzle of you trying to get in a loop that's going to get you coins faster than the other players, and just keeping your fingers crossed and hoping that they're not able to screw up your loop by placing a certain tile. But even if they are, you're not really set back that much. It's just a matter of you getting the right tiles and starting all over again. And most games of Drakon that we played ended up where people were really close in coins. It's just a matter of who was able to get to that point first and who wasn't screwed over enough by the other players. And none of it was very exciting. You have all these cool tiles with special effects, and most of the time it's easy to avoid them, and most of the time they don't do much to you. And that's a really, really odd thing for a game that's supposed to be sort of exciting and thematic. And the cardinal sin of this game is the game is called Drakon, about this enormous dragon that comes in and chases you and just basically makes your life miserable, and you will barely ever see him. I played this game at 4 times, maybe 5 times, and because it is quick, I'll give it that as well. But I think I only saw Drakon in maybe 2 of the games, and he barely did anything because there's only a few tiles in that whole big stack that actually summon Drakon. And even when he's there, again, it's not that big a deal to just avoid him. And even if he sets you back to start, the dungeon, especially since if you're only playing with 3 or 4 players, it doesn't get very big. It's not going to set you back that much, and even if it did, I mean, again, you're not doing anything that exciting. There's just no threat here. There's no tension. Drakon is just sort of this big plastic lump that may or may not come out randomly. I don't know. I don't know if the solution to that was to put more Drakon tiles in there and make him more of a threat, but then it would probably get too annoying because then he's just going to be constantly moving around and you're not doing any of the other cool stuff you're supposed to be doing with the other dungeon tiles, which never happens as well. So, and then of course you can play with the variant that you can get out by finding the portal instead of just playing to a certain amount. That's a little more interesting, but again, if you don't draw that right away, then you're just sort of sitting there trying to stay out of harm's way, which isn't too difficult, hoping that you're the first one to draw the escape tile, and hoping that no one else is hoarding them, I guess. But then you also can play with, so that's not great, but you can play with the variant, which I do recommend at least, that every player has a special power, but you can only use special power once per game, and it's not that game changing. I can move 2 tiles, or I can push you out. Okay. So I'm beginning to understand why this game was out of print. It's fine. It's not totally broken, and it just is what it is, but man, what a waste of a theme. It really felt like this could have just been I don't know, a tile-laying farming game. It feels like they took the basic essence of Carcassonne, a game which I totally despise, and just slapped a dungeon theme on it and actually made it less exciting and interesting. It's so weird. But yeah, I can't recommend it, especially since it's out of print and going for some fairly high prices. I definitely would not bother. I mean, I think if you're like me, you probably see an out-of-print game with a cool dragon head on the cover and cool miniatures and pictures and be like, oh wow, I gotta get this game and I gotta get it now before it's totally out of print and impossible to find. You don't. You're fine. There's lots of other fantasy themed games that are in print that do a much better job at getting the theme across and giving you excitement than Drakon does. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.